And what a freeing thing to be able to see it through that lens. It says, yeah, what happened was wrong, and I don't have to hold on to it. I can see it through a lens of, yeah, it was their fallenness. And in that context, I think that just brings some freedom. The gospel is able to speak into those things.
I'm back in the studio with Brian and Amber. Great to have you both along, and we're going to pick up with a conversation that we started on honoring parents. And in the last episode, we really did a nice job in really casting this larger angle view of what honoring parents look like and what it doesn't look like, some practical applications of that. We want to needle in now today on some more difficult nuances, such as marriage and singleness and what that looks like there and that transfer of honor and authority, as well as when we've got hurts that have incurred, and what do we do with those? So Brian and Amber, we have some clear gateways into this shift in the scriptures with marriage, for example. So it says you're supposed to leave father and mother and cleave to your wife. And so there's kind of like this clear separation that once a person is married, well, then, yeah, I'm going to listen to mom and dad, but I've got to be at peace with my spouse. And it's kind of like, yes, that all needs to happen. But we have this space for the single, for example, where that might be a little bit clouded. How does that transition work?
I think so. I think there can be a question of authority, especially for female, and just, okay, who's your spiritual authority now? If it's not a husband, or I know I talk with people and they wonder, is it okay for me to live outside of my parents' home, or what does that look like? Yeah. Who do I answer to, so to speak?
Yeah.
And I think in that, one of the things that it makes me think of is just the progression as you're walking through life and you're growing in that independence or you're maturing, that to invite other people into your life that can speak truth, and those even being people that mom and dad can be supportive of as well. But again, that natural progression that as you're growing and maturing, you're inviting other people to speak into those places. It's kind of you're already naturally moving in that way. Whether or not you get married or not, there is some transfer of authority in and of itself just by those kind of dynamics.
Sure. And if we just think through the whole life cycle out, I mean, at some point in time, mom and dad are not going to be there, right? Mm-hmm. So there is this release in a sense. I guess you could pray this out to the end. What does a single do when mom and dad are passed, right? Obviously, there has to have been a God-ordained transfer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true. And just to remember that honoring is not just for singles. It's for both married and singles. I even look around our meeting today. Matt and Brian, both of you are married and I'm single, and yet each of us have the exact same commandment in Scripture. Mm-hmm. And all the stuff that we're talking about applies just as much to you as to me. And so that's pretty powerful to think about.
Yeah, and again, I think it just takes us back to that place where we're all on even playing field. It's not one is better or under, or, it's not mom and dad have all the authority. And it's that we're all underneath the authority of God. And what does it look like? Single, married, parent, child, that we're living in a way that's ruled by grace and love and those kind of principles underneath the authority of God. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for both the child, married or single, and it's a challenge for the parent as well. It's releasing things that we want to hold on to or rights that we feel like we're inclined to, and it's just hard. Mm-hmm.
So a few minutes ago, Matt, you referenced that someday our parents aren't going to be here. And it's really interesting when you play out the whole life cycle of parenting. You think about what that looks like as a 6-year-old, what that looks like as you move into adulthood, and then what that looks like when you're older and maybe have to care for your parents. It's almost like the roles get reversed toward the end of life. And that's something that's natural. That's something that's supposed to happen. But that's a part of that.
But that honoring parents looks at a 6-year-old that there's definitely a space there that we understand what honoring parents look like.
Yeah.
And as middle-aged, honoring parents looks different, but it's there. And you're absolutely right. When you're caring for your folks, wow, honoring parents is obvious there in new, vibrant ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, just that big picture lens, I think, changes and it moves it away from this one specific incident, whatever it is, or issue, into, wow, this is like a lifestyle.
It looks different, but the honor, just as the commandment says, is so present always. I want to broach a topic. Some have been wounded deeply by a parent. It could be abuse. could be neglect of some sort, lots of hurts. And you know that better than I do. What does honor look like?
What does that look like for me not to hold on to hurts, that mom and dad have? Of course they've made mistakes. Of course they haven't done things perfectly. And what does that look like for me not to hold on to that? For me to, instead express love or have a heart that's full of love and care towards them rather than hurt and judgment and holding on to things.
So again, I think about what we mentioned earlier about the inward focus. And are you holding on to all of those hurts? Are you keeping score? Are you consumed by your bitterness? Because I think that can be a really big indicator that there's some things that you're maybe not at peace with or you aren't resolved in your mind. And so for me, again, honor isn't necessarily to have this restored relationship, because sometimes that's just not possible. But at some point, you do have to come to terms with that, with where things are at.
And one thing that comes to mind in that space is just being able to find a place or a way to be open and honest about just the reality of some of those hurts and maybe the effect. And is there a trusted mentor figure? Is that something in your prayer life with the Lord you can be bringing before, so that there can be this space that says, boy, this is hard and this was hurtful, and I want to move forward in a way that follows your commandment that I need to still honor them even in the midst of that.
Yeah. I've got a dear friend who's had a very difficult upbringing and past, to the point raised by a single mother, and she made very poor decisions, and he had to be removed from her home, but it still has a relationship with his mom. And every time he talks about his mom, it's always with honor. I know about the hurts, and it doesn't make it less painful, but he processes all of that hurt in that it was the effects of sin, and it was the brokenness that she had, and he was part of the collateral damage of that brokenness. But he has a way of separating her from it, if that makes sense. And he does so through a gospel lens. That's the only way I can make sense of it.
Yeah. And when you see that, it's a powerful thing when somebody is able to say, okay, not asking the question, what do I deserve or what should have happened, but what does this look like to see this as my parent, as a fellow human being who's far from perfect, and certainly it wasn't their intention to be a hurtful parent, and just to connect with them on that level as a fellow human being, a fellow, struggler, and I want to interact and engage people in a different way, and I can do that by learning even through their own brokenness and their mistakes.
Yeah, and maybe honor doesn't look like me asking advice from mom because of, that. But the relationship, and that's what we talked about honor is lifting up and having a respect for this relationship is so dear that he is loving her like Jesus does, if that makes sense. It just looks different, but the honor is so obviously there.
So I love that. I love that honor is something that is organic in the sense that it changes. And so I think that's why people can get hung up on this, right? Because it's not so clearly defined, as we talked about earlier. It's not compliance. It's not so black and white or so easy.
It looks differently today than it did yesterday. That's unsettling.
And so being able to do this with grace and with love, it really stands out when you see good examples of that.
Yeah. And what examples we have in Scripture, I'm always mystified to watch Jesus interact, when he's brought before Pilate. He was very honoring. He's very respectful. He knew how to walk this road of honor. We have examples as Daniel with his kings, right? Clearly honor, but not exactly compliance, right? It looked very different. And David and Saul is another good example. There's no doubt David honored Saul. Did he fall in line with Saul? Not at all.
Yeah.
But that deeper love and respect was oh so vibrant and real.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is, even as you're sharing that, Matt, that comes to mind for me is that if you're on the child end of this, like for myself as a young adult, I want my heart to be to honor mom and dad. And my hope is that they will feel honored. I'm really grateful in my relationship with my parents. I think they do, but that may not always be the case. And depending on your circumstance, they may not feel honored, but it should be our heart's desire that we are honoring them.
Do you want me to break it to Brian that he's not a young adult, or do you want to?
What do you mean I'm not a young adult? What am I then? Am I an old man now? Have I moved into that
You
category?
have no idea how many eye rolls went across the nation right when you said that, Brian.
Oh, man, that's the problem with this space. You don't fit with the old people, and the young people won't claim you, so I don't know.
That's great.
Okay, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and in closing, let's just throw some words out there that you think of when I say honoring mom and dad. What are some words that help us crystallize that concept?
Respect, a respect for them.
Kindness, just treating them a kindness and a care.
It's a decision that we have to make this decision that I want to and I will honor them.
Lifelong. It's a lifelong command.
And with that, we'll conclude here our episode on honoring our folks. I trust and pray that the content shared here today was God-glorifying, it was biblical, and we trust that it's helpful to each one. Thanks for being with us.